really simple. Lord, we desire, as we come to your word this morning, to let our lives be an echo of this song, God, that we would glorify your name, that we would make your name be the name we lift up more than our own kingdom or our own desires, God. What we really want when we're really being ourselves and remembering who we are in relation to you is we want to see your glory, God. We want to see your kingdom and all of its beauty and truth and all of its healing come upon those we love and those we care about, for those who are vulnerable in the world. We want to see your glory spread over the earth as the water covers the seas. And in some small way, God, we're asking that you do that now as we hear your word. Open us up by your Holy Spirit to hear it. And God, not by any act of our own selves, but by an act of your Spirit, we ask that word would be allowed to go into our hearts and change us. Let this be for the glory of Jesus, we pray. Amen. So we have been in a series of the Old Testament, and we have been walking through David's kingly line. We have been with David for several weeks, but now we're moving toward his son, Solomon, and we get to have a window into who Solomon was and what he was about as we hear this passage. Solomon pops up all over the New Testament, such as when Jesus tells the disciples not to worry about their lives. Do you remember this line from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6, when Jesus says, "Why are you worried about your life? And why are you worried about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon, in all of his glory, was not clothed like one of these." Jesus talks later about Solomon and all of his great wisdom in Matthew 12. And throughout the prophets, Solomon's life just looms large. Like I talked to the kids about, Solomon is credited with writing the book of Proverbs. He wrote a few Psalms, and the Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, and the book of Ecclesiastes. All these things are attributed to Solomon and his wisdom. So we get a chance to hear the start of Solomon's ministry and life as a king in this passage. And we get to hear how he has great capacity for strength. And we also hear, if you listen for it, how he's got just the same kind of stuff that we do. And he can fall just as any leader can. So let's listen into 1 Kings chapter 3, starting in verse 1 and ending in verse 14. And it's in your bulletin if you'd like to follow along, or you're welcome just to listen. Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were sacrificing at the high places, however, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David. Only he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. And at Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, "Ask what I should give to you." And Solomon said, You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord, my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or to come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you've chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this your great people? It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. If you are grateful, say thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
Friends, a few weeks ago, I was in Chicago for a 36-hour meeting for the RCA's 2020 Vision Team. Our work has been to listen for what the Spirit might be saying to the broader church as we look toward a future. We are a group of 12 pastors from across the U.S. and Canada, and we have a few other members with us. In the RCA, we have a leader called the General Secretary, and there was someone who served in that role as an interim for 1 year, and someone who's just now taken that role. The one who's just taken the role for the long term, his name is Eddie Alaman, and he's a wise and faithful leader, and I've been so glad to get to know him. And the other one is named Don Poost, and I connect with Don because he grew up in a dairy farm, so we talk cows as best I can with him together. Don't laugh, I do have some, I can identify a Holstein, I can identify a Jersey. So I have some fluidity with you all. There's so many more things I'm just gonna leave that right there. And Don also, I really respect him because he served a kind of out-of-the-way church in Ohio for 38 years. Like his first call, the whole of his ministry. So Don has this kind of steady presence, and just I've really come to be grateful for him. So the other couple of people in the room, I want to give you a little background to this. There's a person named Liz, and she keeps up with all of our travel accommodations and details. She's our detail person from the RCA staff. And then there are two facilitators. Their names are Tricia Taylor and Jim Harrington. When we started meeting as an RCA Vision Team, we realized that we needed someone to help us not get lost in this big work. The work that we're doing is we're either going to do nothing as the RCA, which is probably kind of a non-option, really. We're going to radically reorganize in some way, the way that we organize as churches, as classes, or we're going to gracefully separate. Those are at least three of the main options. So the RCA 2020 Vision Team, even though I've communicated some about this, that's sort of the work that we have to do. And these two facilitators came in because they have worked with the RCA and with churches that are facing some really challenging futures, and they help people not get totally stuck and be able to find a way out and listen to the Holy Spirit. And I kind of give you this background to share with you this something that Jim said when we were gathered together, and it just hasn't left me. Now, I'll get to that in a minute. But what I wanted to share is that I'm really aware that I love to make people pretty happy. Not all of us are built this way, but some of us really like to make sure people are cared for, or at least there's peace between relationships. We all have some capacity for that. Some of us like to challenge the status quo more than others. But I do like to feel that there is peace and that there's a sense of togetherness. And this work that I've been called to in the RCA's 2020 Vision Team, just guarantees that our work is going to make some people really unhappy and really anxious, and that this work will just be something that requires a lot of discernment. Which is like, what a great setup, right? This connects to Solomon because it requires a lot of wisdom to do this work. And now I'll get to the line that Jim said to us that I haven't been able to get out of my mind. So we were talking about this immense task and how to be faithful to it together as a group. And I consider that all of us have really big things in our lives. We all have family dynamics or things in our businesses. When we look toward the future, things are not always totally clear, and it requires discernment and wisdom to know how to walk forward as a body, as a family, as a business, as a people. We're all facing something that feels challenging to us. So here's this thing that Jim said that has continued to come back to my mind. He confessed to us that there was a time in his life where he realized that he said, I have been guilty all my life. I have been guilty of making plans all my life and then asking God to bless them. Just keeps coming to my mind. Did you catch the kind of order of that? I have been guilty of making plans all my life and then asking God to bless them. There is something about the order in which we seek to live our lives that matters. It matters how we welcome the Holy Spirit's presence into our plan making so that we don't just construct some detailed vision or beautiful spreadsheet or a list of things to do at different times without consulting the Lord first, to ask him to plan our steps, to ask him to show us the way. I have been guilty of making plans all my life and then asking the Lord to bless them. I thought of this because of David. Remember the passage that Pastor Noah brought to us last week? David came to the Lord and said, Lord, my house is lined with cedar and is lavish and beautiful, and I realize that you're residing in a tent. So Lord, I'm going to make a house for you, and this is how this is going to be. And the Lord came to David, remember what he said? And he said, no, David, I didn't ask you to build me a house. I didn't ask you that. I'm actually, David, going to build you and your kingdom and your line. I'm going to pour into you, David. I'm asking you to receive from me. And actually, your son will be the one to build me a house. So David made some plans and then asked if God would kind of put the nice seal of blessing on it. A kingdom that David, that the Lord built for David extended into Solomon, and that's kind of a placement for us today. After Solomon came Jesus, who was the wisest of the wise kings and the deliverer, the one who rules unlike any other. So in this passage, Solomon has taken the throne, and here is this encounter with the Lord. And here's what he asks. God comes to him and just says, ask me something. Can you imagine? How would we answer that? Ask me something. Ask me something in a dream. What would you like me to give to you, Solomon? Solomon says, after he recounts God's steadfast love to David, fulfilling his promises, he says, give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this your great people? What's amazing about Solomon before God blesses his request for wisdom and understanding is that it's Solomon's intention to be faithful to the people that God has put around him and under him to lead. That is Solomon's first heart, which is why he says, I am but a child, showing I am nothing to know how to lead your people. So Lord, you're going to have to help me know what I need to do this faithfully. Here is a pastor's pastor, one who cares about the people that he is leading, one who wants to seek their good more than his own riches. Typically people in the Old Testament ask for what? Kill all my enemies Give me a long life. Make me really rich. It's not really like that different actually than today. Remove people from me that are bothering me or difficult for me. Make me really stable and healthy and wealthy, and give me lots of great things, God. And give me a long life in which to live in. But God says, because you didn't ask for those things, I'll give them to you, actually. And Solomon was someone who was sought by really important people in his life. Solomon was someone to know. But that is not how Solomon started off. Maybe it was because Solomon slowed down and learned from the mistakes of his dad. Maybe it was just God's grace in Solomon. But Solomon chooses wisely to ask for wisdom from the Lord. One writer who has studied this passage says this: what Solomon does not ask for as the trappings of glory and worldly success that made up most of the royal life, long life, riches, death to the opposition. It was just this pattern that Deuteronomy warned against, as had Samuel. These glories would be part of Solomon's kingship, but only as God's gifts, rewards for Solomon's proper focus for an entirely different pattern of kingship. So the goal of Solomon's life as a king was to have a mind that understood. And literally, in Hebrew, it's called like a discerning heart is called a discerning mind. The heart was more like the mind of the Hebrew people. Like the mind is where our thoughts came from. We think about our heads being where our minds are, and our hearts where our emotions spring from. But in the Hebrew people, they thought of their hearts as being where wisdom and understanding come from. So literally, he's asking for, God, give me a hearing heart. Give me a heart that hears well from you and hears the people. What Solomon chooses is to ask for wisdom, and this pleases the Lord. And I wanted to just share about wisdom. I entitled this sermon, Wisdom from the Ground Up. And I think we think about wisdom sometimes as something that can be more in our minds. Like, we could have a roundtable discussion about this, but being wise is being able to kind of judge between two difficult situations or know a way forward. The story that follows right after this is that famous story of the two women who have one baby between them, and they're trying to someone's baby has died in the story, and the women come to Solomon and say, this is both my baby. People are, these women are arguing over this, and Solomon acts in such a way that helps discover the true mother of this baby. That story follows right after this if you're curious about it. I won't take all the time right now to talk about it. But Solomon has an awareness of what true motherhood would look like, and that's why he's able to determine who's the true mother of these two. So wisdom is actually something that understands something of the soil or the humble stuff. Wisdom is not getting a high score on your SAT, to which let the people say amen. And it's not a 4.0. It's not a lot of things that might look like success. But wisdom is being able to be in touch with your inner life and being able to listen to what God might be saying to you so that you can listen to other people. Wisdom is not rash, and it's not something that comes honestly to many of the young. There's a reason why our oldest ones are our wisest ones, because they have seen lots of situations and have learned how to judge faithfully. And that's why we are grateful for all the ones among us who are in their upper decades of life, because we need you to be able to help us be faithful as a church. So wisdom has more to do in the Old Testament with being involved with skill, like cutting wood in the right way, respecting the grain and the shape of the wood, like a craftsman. Wisdom has more to do with making a good call about something. We say that kind of popularly, like they made a really good call, like a referee or something. Wisdom comes from being able to engage people at a really human level, like human or humble. Those all have the root word of humus, like dirt. So someone that can walk in barn boots maybe and be able to say what's so in a way that's faithful. I wanted to get inside of wisdom in this way for us to feel what it is like to step into wisdom in our own homes and community. Because we come into situations that may not be easy, but God calls us to pay attention to our feet on the ground, pay attention to the person before us, and pay attention to the Lord speaking to us. And that just requires a groundedness that feels different to me than thinking about a king with a fancy crown. Does that make sense? The very first story of wisdom is about these two prostitutes, actually. That's the story that follows, these two women who don't have a legitimate child in many ways. Solomon's with them and understands how to talk with them. That's the kind of boots on the ground wisdom that God calls his people to, knowing how to live among people. So Solomon asks for this for the Lord, that he would govern the people well, that he would be a faithful king like this. And God responds by saying, okay, Solomon, I'm really glad that you asked this way, and I'm going to give these other things to you. Now, it happens that God gives Solomon riches, and like I told the kids, probably lots of sparkly crowns, lots of beautiful robes. Solomon was wealthy and successful in everyone's standards. Solomon was a person to see. He was on the A-list. Solomon became a really important person. So he needed that grounding of humility because he was the most popular enigmatic person in any room. People wanted to be near him. He was a flashy person, and his name continues to cause ripples within the scriptural witness. And there is a stream in the church that says that if we follow the Lord, that we're going to have a brand new car. Don't laugh, because this is really real in some places. If we seek the Lord, then all the worldly gifts will be added to us. This does happen. It happened to Solomon, and it's happened to many of us. But that's not what God promises for faithfulness. Do you hear me here on this? It sometimes comes that God gives us lots of possessions within the world, but that's not the only way that God calls us in faithfulness. And actually, some of these ways that Solomon was blessed to have all these things, God had him into some trouble. Did you hear the very first line when Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh's daughter, and he sacrificed in the high places? Solomon was a wise person, but some of this engagement with other, at the time of the Old Testament, other nations and peoples kind of led him astray. He loved women in a way that took him off course many times. So Solomon was a wise king, but he wasn't a perfect king, just like his dad. And great could be the fall of a leader if we forget that they're human beings needing the Lord just as much as the rest of all of us. The balancing act for us to believe that God keeps his covenant promises. God promised to David that he would hold this line until Jesus came, that David's line would be an everlasting kingdom. God promised that for him in no uncertain terms. And at the end, the very last verse, verse 14, God says to Solomon, "And if you follow my commands, I will reward you with a long life." And this is the last kind of big piece I want to end with today. The church has had a lot of trouble holding to believing that God keeps his promises, that God will never forsake and leave us. And now, what's our response? Some people say, well, as long as I'm here at church once a year, I'm good. Or this has been abused in other places. People feel like they can take the grace of God lightly. We don't believe that. We believe that Christ promises this everlasting promise for his covenant people, and God calls us to follow him. That and God promising Solomon a long life if he follows him is the tension that's been hard for the church to hold. So hear me on this. If we're praying for someone and that person is not healed in some way, or if we're asking something of the Lord, it's not a lack of faith for us if God does not move in that way. God promises that he will always be here for us, but God does not always say how he'll be here for us. Does that make sense? The church has, in many times, not always held the tension of the promise of God and the importance of our efforts. We kind of either get lazy with one or ungrateful, or we get overly anxious with the other. God promises to be with us, and God says, because you're my child, I'm calling you to do this with me. We talk about this with our new members class, or our when we've done formation of faith with our younger people. Baptism brings you into the family. You are part of the family. You will always be part of the family. And coming to the table is coming to the table together. God calls us to be part of each other's family, and as you get older, you're asked to do things in your family. So as you get older, you're going to be asked to unload the dishwasher. You're going to be asked to fold the towels. The folding of the towels and the unloading of the dishwasher are concrete ways that God calls us to live a life of faith. God's steadfast promise and covenant is always present. And God says, I'm going to need you to step in here and do some things with me for the sake of my kingdom. So can we hold that tension faithfully as a community? It's not easy.